Welcome to the IT in Motion podcast, where we make technology exciting and informative. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Josh. We're your hosts. Today we're talking to Jude Evans McCarthy, a senior Scrum Master here at ScienceLogic. Everybody give it up for Jude.
Hey, Jude,
how are you doing today?
Me. Good.
You're welcome.
Good. I'm
Tell
glad
us a bit about yourself.
I'm Jude Evans McCarthy. I'm a senior Scrum Master. I work for Pat McLean in the Product and Engineering Department.
Well, awesome. Well, Jude, as I think you know, we like to get to know our guests with a little bit of a game. So we're going to kick things off today with a game. Now, when you and I were talking earlier, you told me you're really into dogs.
Yep.
And that you could talk about it all day. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask you a question. I'm going to give you a situation, and you can tell us what dog breed you think would be best for that situation and why.
Okay.
All right. So the first situation, you need to find Timmy in the well.
Oh, well, I'm definitely going to go with a collie because, Lassie was the classic finding Timmy in the well kind of dog. So, yeah, definitely a collie for that one.
All right. Awesome. How about you need to solve a mystery?
Well, that would have to be, what was Scooby, a Great Dane? It'd have to be a Great Dane. And he'd have to be named Scooby.
All right, here's a more of a silly one. What dog breed would you want to use to find the right olives for a salad?
Oh, probably a poodle, because I think they have the best noses among all the breeds, and they're pretty smart.
Interesting.
I'm not a poodle person, but that's what I hear.
That's what you hear. All right, awesome. How about if you wanted to have a dog help you write a good book?
That would have to be a very calm dog. So probably a basset hound sleeping at my feet by the fireplace.
That's fantastic. All right. What if you're looking for a new home? What kind of dog do you want?
That would have to be a German Shepherd. Shepherds will sniff out the best of anything. They'll also sniff out drugs, and you could stay in a good neighborhood.
I saw this video segment online about bloodhounds. They don't tend to use hounds anymore. They tend to use German Shepherds because they're such a smart animal.
Right.
They're able to partner really well with their handler.
They were bred to use their noses and their ears. I don't know if you know much about them, but their ears brush the ground as they're on a trail, and it kicks up the scent, which keeps it fresh for their noses. But German Shepherds are the ones, and Belgian Malinois, they use them for sniffing out bad things at airports and stuff like that. So I figured they'll sniff out a good home for me.
There you go. All right, last question for the game. Which dog breed would you want if you're traveling to space?
Oh, that would have to be... That would have to be a small dog because the capsules are small. So I'd say like Toto, what's Toto's breed? I can't call it up right now. Norwich Terrier or a Cairn Terrier? Something like that. A small terrier. They're very smart, and they're compact.
With wiry fur so it doesn't float all around the cabin.
Exactly. Yeah. You don't want to take a Samoyed up there because they have that double undercoat and you're constantly vacuuming. You don't want that in a space capsule.
Yeah, I think you'd be in trouble.
I was going to say, actually, for me, like finding the right olives and traveling to space is the same dog. We have a Australian Labradoodle, and he has an amazing nose. And he's also is a fantastic retriever. Like, he plays those games all the time, so he could go and find them and probably bring them to you. But he's really, really smart. And I thought that, hey, it's a golden doodle, and so therefore it's going to definitely have the retriever will calm the poodle aspect of him. But no. Right. He's really, really smart and has to be engaged all the time. And so I think the idea of actually doing training to go to space.
They don't shed, so you're not going to clog all your filters in the space capsule.
That's right. Exactly. They don't shed. Although I didn't know at the time how much haircuts for those guys were going to be. I mean, that's definitely something they don't tell you about. But yeah, he'd be perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. It's awesome.
Well, fantastic. Well, so Jude, tell us a little bit about your background.
Oh, well, I started in 1986. I was working as an accounts payable clerk of all things. And the company brought in some network equipment to connect us to the home office. And when it would fail, they had nobody on our end that could repair it, troubleshoot it, anything like that. So I raised my hand and said, "Hey, I'll learn this." And that's how I got started. And I did a lot of stuff with hardware. Started as a computer operator with SAIC. I spent 7 years with SAIC. And during that tenure, I was a computer operator for a year and a half. And then I was a traveling implementation specialist. So I went out and trained doctors and nurses on using the CHCS system. And that's back when it was dumb terminals and mag tapes and all of that stuff. And then I rounded out my career with them as a hardware specialist. After that, I moved on to other jobs as a network engineer. I taught myself networking and took off with that. And I did that until 2003. And at that point, I went back to school, got my degree. I didn't start out with a degree. I was raising children. So I got my degree, and then I got my master's at the School of Engineering at Mercer University in Macon, and spent 17 years as a technical writer before moving on to Scrum Master. While I was still working at Ericsson, which is one of the companies I worked at, and I was a director of customer support there, because you move up the ladder, and I was at that point in the ladder. And I actually wrote a couple of books. I met Tom Thomas, who's an author of technical books, and he had a contract to do Cisco Internetwork design, and he had no time to do it. So he engaged me because he had seen some of my writing, and he said, "I'd really like for you to take this on if you think you can." And I wondered, do I have it in me? Because at that point, I didn't have my degree. I hadn't been a technical writer, but it was a perfect fit. So that's how I did that. So I've got a couple of books out. Cisco Internetwork Design is one of them, and Juniper Internetwork Routing, I think it's called. It's still in print. Cisco Internetwork Design, of course, has moved on because the technology changes so fast.
Sure, yeah.
How do you think your background as a writer really helps you now as a Scrum Master?
Oh
right?
my
There's
gosh.
a lot of
Yeah.
a lot of different ways that people are drawn to that, and I'm just curious. I can think of some, but like how in particular has it been beneficial for you?
So one of the things is it was a challenge for me to move from being in that insular world of documentation and working with teams. It was, I knew I needed a challenge. I knew I needed to do something new. So the writing, though, has enabled me to use a lot of different tools. My technical background, of course, helps with that. I've learned release management. I write reports. I deliver presentations. I work with teams on their retrospectives to kind of tease it out of them, like what's going wrong here? What are the things we think we can do better? And I think that, first of all, knowing the product, because when you start out in technical documentation, you have to learn the product from the ground up. You have to know how to install it. You have to know how to set it up. You have to run it, how to troubleshoot it. So I still write bugs for other teams when I find things. And I just think that technical writing gave me that background in ScienceLogic and SL1 and then now in PowerFlow that I needed to be able to communicate effectively with my teams. They trust me.
Oh, I was going to say, Josh and I were talking about this earlier, and basically he said, you can really tell when you're looking at technical documentation whether the person who pulled it together has actually been there, done it, hands on the keyboard, thought about quality, and like being able to really make it easy for the users to be successful out of the box.
Right. And that's, something that I brought from my background is understanding the user, understanding the customer. It doesn't mean that I'm face to face with them now necessarily, but in my background, I was in the trenches. sometimes under the subfloor. So I understand where they're coming from and what they need. And of course, they don't have to get under a subfloor with SL1, but just understanding
the
what they want to
infrastructure
do.
starts below the racks.
It does. True. And physical layer.
mean, they may not need to, but then again, SL1 may tell them something that may take them under the subfloor to fix.
That's right. Or into the wiring closet.
Yep.
A card died. So they need to go troubleshoot that. So sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one thing I know you've been very involved in at ScienceLogic is the Pride ERG.
Yes.
I'm sure a lot of people listening to this don't know what an ERG is. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what that is and why the Pride ERG, what the Pride ERG is, why it's so important to you.
Sure. So we started a couple of years ago with employee resource groups. And these are designed to be for specific groups within the company to provide a community and provide, assistance for people, mentorships for people. And it does a couple of things. It kind of drives getting to know other people that you might not work with every day. It also drives that sense of we're all in this together. So the Pride ERG, I work as a co-chair with Brian Anderton and Shane as our chair. And we have done some pretty amazing things. We're going to have a booth at Rest in Pride this year. We're going to have special T-shirts made and, just hang out, talk to people about ScienceLogic, talk to people about what an employee resource group is and how we've made a difference at our company. And you never know how that will spread.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's about the outreach. It's about building that sense of community and giving people a place for belonging.
Absolutely. 100%. I was a little scared myself. And, and I've been out for a long time, but I was a little scared myself because I wasn't out at work. I didn't know how safe it would be. So for me, it was a challenge. I had to, let go of my ego and just say, if I come out and I'm very public about who I am at work, it's going to enable other people to come out. It's going to make it safe for them. So that's the other part of it is safety.
Well, I think that leads to a really good question, which is, for people who are looking to respectfully interact with members of the LGBTQA IA plus community, what sort of advice can you give them to be respectful? What can you tell them if they're scared about making a mistake?
Well, we all make mistakes. I make mistakes. We have people that like to be known by they, them pronouns. So the first thing I do is try to get to know someone. I ask them their name and what they do and what are your preferred pronouns? Or actually, as we say now, what are your pronouns? Because it's not a preference, it's who you are. It stumbles me a little bit when I have to use they, them, because coming from an English background, coming from a writing background, I always saw that as a plural pronoun.
Yeah.
And now it's used as a singular pronoun and not just like referencing somebody, but, in normal conversation, Shane goes by they, them pronouns. And I found myself at the end of our calls saying, with he and Brian, thanks, guys. And then I stopped myself. I said, I'm really sorry. I don't mean that I think you're a guy, a he, him. It's how I address everybody. And he's like, I'm fine with that. But I started signing off with folks. See you later, folks. So it's a learning process for all of us. I'm in my 60s now, and it's things have changed so much. When I was in high school, the worst thing you could be is gay. It was just horrible how we were treated in the 60s and 70s. And so I was very much in the closet, got married, had 2 children, stayed married for 27 years. And then I was like, okay, I'm done. I've got to be who I am now. So it's constantly a learning process for all of us. So if you make a mistake, just stop yourself and just say, how would you like to be addressed? I want to be respectful. And if you make a mistake, stop yourself again. I mean, people are understanding. They don't think you're being malicious unless you are being malicious. But yeah, I doubt that's coming from either of you.
Your writer's perspective here is really interesting, right? And especially around a time where there's kind of a focus on semantics and language. And it really does, in my mind, it goes to narrative. And you're talking about how the rate of change here and acceptance has really accelerated.
Right.
And when I talk to other parents, for example, my kids are pretty young. Is that they'll basically say, it's things are happening so fast that their head is spinning, and they're trying to engage and they're trying to find that space. But going back to your experience as a writer, is that there's a lot of just old narratives, right? That people have carried with them for a really long time. How do you recommend people not so much break down narratives, but hold space to create an opportunity to learn a new narrative, or to let someone tell their story in a way that really does inform their opportunity to just have space and to be curious?
First of all, stop talking. Ask questions. If you're going to open your mouth, ask a question, because you're in learning mode. You're not telling the person who to be. You're in learning mode. So just whatever you're curious about, ask, because I promise you they want to tell you. They want you to understand. It doesn't matter if you're talking about a 10-year-old or you're talking about a 60-year-old. They want to educate you. They want you to know. They want you to learn to respect them, and they want to have that relationship with you. So if you're going to open your mouth, make it a question.
Be ready to receive when you ask, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it might not be the answer you want, but allow yourself the time to absorb that and think about it, and then come back with more questions later. There's nothing wrong with more questions.
Well, also one of those things seems to be, and you tell me from your experience, is that sometimes you can be really interested and really open and ask a question, but the person that you're speaking to just might be busy, right? They may have a lot going on, or you don't know what their experience has been, right? Especially like how do they come out, or how do they relate to the world? And so there are times that you can almost be. It seems that it's easy to be, almost too optimistic or too eager, and maybe ask a little bit, and the answer that comes back, they don't have time to necessarily be open. So how do you recommend that people respond to that, where maybe they're really, really eager to engage, but for whatever reason, the person they're speaking with just doesn't really have time?
So a great thing to do in that instance is ask them to go out for a coffee sometime. I mean, coffee is a great conversant. It gets people, it gives you the space to just sit and relax. And when you're in that relaxed mode, it's a whole lot easier to open up and be yourself. I would say, for some people, going out for a drink or dinner is one thing, but I find that to be a little bit more, like, they might not be ready for that. But if you're going to ask your questions and it seems like they're busy, just say, hey, can I take you out for a coffee sometime? I'd really love to get to know you. Right. And that's the whole thing.
And to remember that it's about them. It's not about you. It's not about your perspective, that you are open and interested. And however they are in those moments, or however available they are, it's about them, and let them really guide that conversation.
Sure. And there are people who will not want that conversation. So be prepared for that as well. Those of us in the ERG, we tend to be more open. We tend to want people to know us, but you're going to run into people in life who just, they like their personal space. And if you cross into that, they're not going to be receptive to it. So just be ready for wherever they are, to meet them where they are.
Because they're just people like everybody else, right?
Absolutely. Because, there are things that I might not, I don't know. I'm a pretty open person, but I can imagine there are things that I don't want people to know about me. Can't think of one right now, honestly, but.
If you could, you would want to say it, right?
Absolutely. I would need a dog in my lap. But yeah, it's, people will tell you who they are when they're ready. You can ask questions, but yeah, definitely meet them where they are. You know,
it can
just
be fraught
respect
going
if they're
into it.
not ready to talk to you about something.
Yeah, absolutely. It can definitely feel fraught going in any sort of personal question with somebody, right? You know,
Yeah.
and especially
And
something that can be loaded with so much trauma.
sure. And I would encourage you to ask at the beginning of the conversation, is it okay for me to ask you some questions about, you know, the fact that you're trans or the fact that you're gay? I'm curious. And start it that way. And that's less threatening than if you just jump right in with a question. But that's a good place to start.
Yeah,
just
that's
sort of
excellent advice.
start with being first, just to kind of
Yeah.
just be around in the way that you would. Well, like, people are people. This is the way that
Yeah.
you would with anything else, right? If you want anything else in someone's background, you would just use the same sort of respect and create
Absolutely.
time and create a space that's curious, but give
Hmm.
people an opportunity to reveal and share themselves on their own pace, and that
Yeah.
it's not a different way of speaking, it's not a different wavelength,
Right.
it's just an additional bit of space, just like
Right.
normal human interaction.
And I would tell you, if you're talking to someone who's non-binary or trans identified, uh, don't ask questions about their point in the transition. That's disrespectful. And you wouldn't know that unless you're part of the community, but that's a very, very personal thing. Um, it's just something you don't want to go into. It's more like about who they see themselves to be. Uh, it's not at all about what point they're at in the transition. Like I myself identify as non-binary. Now, on any given day, I might dress in men's clothes, I might dress in women's clothes, I might feel more masculine, I might feel more feminine. It just depends on the day for me. And it took me a long time to reach that conclusion. And I credit our younger generation for bringing us these new ways of being. I mean, it was a big deal back in the 70s when we knew someone at a job who was trans. And she faced a lot of just rudeness and disrespect. And I don't know how she dealt with it, but we know better now, so we do better.
Well, that's
As
great.
Maya
I credit
Angelou
this.
says.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Zoomers are kicking a lot of doors open for a lot of people, right? They
Yes,
just have a much broader idea of what humanity is, and
absolutely.
I think they've watched other generations think about incremental changes, and
Hmm.
they're not exactly radicals, but it just doesn't occur to them that change can't happen, right?
Right.
The old patterns and narratives of the past about how people adapt and how society changes, they just don't consider any of that, and they look at it directly, from the
Right. Right.
perspective of who they are and where the world is in the moment, and
Right.
they're not so concerned.
But they have to
Um,
remember that it was us boomers who kicked those doors open so they could do that. I hear a lot of people disrespecting boomers, and it's like, dude, you would not be where you are today had we not kicked those doors open.
And
So,
that's something you've actually touched on a few times, right? Over the last 40 to 50 years, there's been a lot of changes, and I've got to imagine, there's a sense of relief, but also
yeah,
maybe a sense of hopefulness. Like with all the changes and the way things
absolutely.
are you hopeful? What makes you hopeful?
Just the fact that we're talking about it and the fact that we have an ERG at work where I can just be who I am and not be disrespected by anyone. I mean, from Dave Link on down, and I think he sets a great example with his link with Link meeting. We have a, a not meeting on the calendar with Alexa the day before that. Is there anything coming up with your ERG that you would like for him to be aware of or mention? And he's just so respectful and so curious about the ERGs, and I think it's fantastic. It has really set the example because if you're building something like this from the bottom up, it is a hard push. But if you've got your leadership saying, I respect you. I'm curious. I want to know more about you. It just makes it okay for everybody else to relax and just get to know us.
Yeah, it's really about building that culture of respect from the top to the bottom of the company.
100%.
Well, Jude, thanks for coming on. It's been a great conversation. I think we've all gained a lot from it. If people want to learn more about you or ERGs, where can they go?
Well, for me, if you want to get to know more about me or contact me, I'm on LinkedIn. You could just look for Jude Evans McCarthy. And if you want to find out if your company has an ERG, you could talk to your HR department. Start one if there isn't one. A great resource that's out there and has some publicly available information is Out and Equal in the Workplace. They have yearly conferences and they have just a lot of free material on their site about starting ERGs.
All right. Thank you so much, Jude.
Thanks. See ya.
Thank you so much. It was great to chat.
Likewise.
Thanks for listening, everyone. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd really appreciate you hitting that subscribe button on your favorite podcast app. We're hosted on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and many other platforms. We're adding new podcasts at a regular cadence, so you can also access our podcast at ScienceLogic.com/podcast.